Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Let me have my panelists hop on and join us. Okay. Hi, Sam. Hi, Emily.
Hi.
Thank you all for joining us today. I'm really excited to have this conversation. I think it's so very important, and I really think it'll be pretty valuable for the families out there and for the kids and teens out there. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm Amanda Villavesas. I'm the director at Mental Health Lou and also a therapist in private practice at North Star Counseling Center. And today I'm joined by Sam Fox Gabinillo, who's an MFT intern, and Emily Davis, who does the Wandering Mind podcast, if you're not familiar with it. Let me tell you a little bit more about them, and I will hand it over to them and let them get started. So Sam is an MFT intern, and she became a therapist so that she could listen to people and help them have a safe source of comfort. Her life and work experiences have made her strong and passionate for empowering people, and her goal is to instill hope in her clients and to walk with them on their journey. She is honest and works collaboratively with clients to help them reach the goals they choose for themselves. She hopes to assist folks so that they realize they are enough and to help people access the resiliency and power they have. So welcome, Sam. Thank you for joining us. And then Emily is
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yes, we're really excited. And Emily is a mental health and wellness advocate. She's the founder and host of the Wandering Mind podcast, which is a mental health podcast. And I think you put out almost weekly. Is that correct?
Every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday. Yes. So seriously, weekly. Yes. And you put one out today.
I did.
Very busy.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And she's also attending the University of Louisville to get her BA in psychology. So you will soon be not just an advocate on the side, but you'll be a colleague really soon as well. So
yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So thank you both. I'm going to turn it over to you. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to use the chat box or the Q&A box, and you can ask questions, and Emily and Sam will get to those towards the end. All right?
Sounds good. Hi, Sam.
Hi, how are you, Emily? I'm so glad to see you.
Yes, likewise. I'm excited to have this conversation. I think, like Amanda said, I think it's a very important conversation to have, especially with everything going on in the world today and how trans youth and trans people in general are coming, out and embracing, what it is to be trans. So yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. Like, trans people are more visible today, and I'm really glad to be a part of trans visibility in this discussion. And I appreciate the people who have jumped on to Zoom today, or anybody that might watch sometime in the future. Just that they came to also participate in trans visibility, awareness, inclusion, acceptance, and support. It's very important. And I think that's some of what we're going to talk about today too, right?
Yes, exactly. So let's just go ahead and get started with the first question. It's a very basic, but yet not well understood question. What does trans mean?
Okay. Yeah. So, when generally a person is born in our society, they're assigned a gender at birth. Okay. And so a trans person is someone whose gender identity doesn't match that of their assigned gender. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's funny because a lot of people, they hear the term trans, but they don't actually take the time necessarily to, look up what it means, or they're hearing different things. So thank you for explaining that. I think that'll help a lot of people better understand.
Yeah, I think too, like there's not there's not just one way to be trans either. And transgender is an umbrella term. So it doesn't necessarily, people get very curious about the wrong things with trans people. And I say that like the wrong things, like meaning the getting really focused on what type of body do they have and and that's, that's really not important for other people to know. So there's a lot of different ways to be trans, like gender questioning, gender fluid, gender creative. It would be just not the typical adherence to traditional gender norms based on gender assigned at birth. A person intersex might identify as trans as well. So I just wanted to throw that out
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
that's very important to touch upon because, like you said, there's an umbrella, and again, a lot of people typically focus on the unimportant or the personal things that society as a whole doesn't really need to focus on. Yeah.
Right, because our society is the binary society. A person is born and then they're assigned a gender, boy or girl. So a
Yes.
person can be either choice A or choice B, 1 or 2, XX or XY. And also under the umbrella term is non-binary. A non-binary person might feel that they are neither man nor woman, or maybe they feel that they're both, or that they're some type of combination of something. So that is valid and wonderful, and I hope to bring some visibility to all trans people and say, yes, that's valid and wonderful and also healthy.
Yeah. So now that we're kind of talking about how in society we typically tend to focus on male or female, we just have those two options.
Mm-hmm.
What does biosex mean? Can you explain what that means at all in regards to the umbrella
Well,
effect?
I usually just think in terms of like sex when we're talking about, as opposed to gender. And actually, sex, what we typically, or maybe like the old way of thinking, was just the way people look when they're born. This way is like how the gender is assigned based on the
Right.
appearance of the physical body and genitalia. But sex actually is a lot more than that. Biological sex, it has to do with chromosomes, hundreds of chromosomes, and I'm a student of couple and family therapy, so I'm not a biologist by any means. But there's chromosomes, there's hormones, um, there's organs, there's body parts, there's all kinds of things that's going into sex. And then with gender, I'm sure sex plays a part of it, but also how we're raised in a acculturation, pressures from society that we're think that we maybe ought to adhere to traditional gender norms. But like you said in the beginning, what's going on in the world today, it's more visibility, and we're coming in of an age where it is becoming more acceptable not to just be choice A or choice B, for example.
Yes, yes, well said. And I love that we're like, with this conversation, we're just bringing awareness and making it more of the norm, which is so important. So in regards to trans youth, and you said there's like an umbrella, there's so many different avenues, if you will.
Yeah.
So a lot of people that aren't trans struggle with the terminology. They don't want to offend. They don't want to say the wrong thing. Can you explain what terms are most appropriate when referring to trans
You know
folks?
what's best is just to ask the person and to use their own language. And it is okay. It it is okay to ask, and it's respectful. Of course, we always have to remember, asking in a respectful way, the way we use our words, in an appropriate context. And and it is okay to ask. And if you make a mistake, it's okay to apologize. You know, when we're talking about any marginalized population, so what's so big in Louisville right now, obviously, we're dealing face to face with racism. So I'm a Caucasian person. I have to work on my own, internalized racism that I've learned as a Caucasian person living in society. And so, what I need to do is to be humble enough that I can ask questions to learn in the right context and not be so afraid to make a mistake or offend that I can't better myself. And there are so many resources too. So if I'm a person that wants to learn more about transgender youth, I have my two favorite books on it that I thought I might share. This one's one of my favorite, is Raising the Transgender Child. And that's actually, and for, let's see, a complete guide for parents, families, and caregivers. And it's really, really good. Angelo and Bowman. And so that's always a great thing because too, so I like to use my example with trying to undo for white people trying to become anti-racist and undo racist thinking. We also live in a transphobic society, or genderist, which is prefers the preference or oppression of trans people, and also the preference and privilege of people that are cisgender, which is CIS gender, which is a person that does identify with their gender assigned at birth. And it's not the responsibility of, for example, a person in the Black, brown, or African American indigenous population to help me undo my racism that I've internalized from society. That's my job. And I can do that by reading and asking in appropriate contexts. And two, if we're trying to undo transphobia or any of these isms or phobias, reading books a great place to start, and to go for the right context. It's not a trans person's responsibility to help us undo really these toxic mindsets and discriminatory ideas that we have that we get from society. And here's another one. Becoming an Ally to the Gender Expansive Child, the one with the superheroes.
Love it.
Bianchi, okay? A guide for parents and carers. That one's a really good one. So good. It's like Trans Kids 100, like very inspiring. I can't recommend enough.
I love that. Thank you for sharing those books, because a lot of people, I think Google is such a large platform. Like you can find such an array and overwhelming amount of information. So to have you actually pinpoint specific books that people can look up and use as resources is really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that kind of brings me to the next question, because both of those books were in regards to children and trans visibility, situations like that. So the next question, when some people might feel like they are just playing the role of boy or girl, or that it's just a phase. So in regards to children and their families, how do you typically assess their child? Or would you leave that up to the physicians when it comes to their gender identity? How would you tackle that situation?
Yeah, sure. So generally, the parents are going to be the ones, or whoever the child's adults, carers, guardians are. They might notice some behaviors that their child is gender expansive, gender fluid, creative, questioning, and not cisgender. And the way that the parents can start to gauge that is by a child's consistency, insistency, and persistency that, hey, I'm not cisgender, I'm gender fluid. A child that was assigned female at birth might just say, I'm a boy. And if that child's saying that consistently, insistently, and persistently, that would probably lead the parents to bring that up, and that would be the parents' choice. And I would encourage folks to look at to speak to their physician about it, only to find resources, not because there's anything wrong with being trans or gender creative or non-binary, but more to get connected and to get support. Because when we're talking about visibility, it's also um, there's hasn't been a lot historically visibility for trans youth. It's been very quiet, and the old way of, and sometimes people still do this. Parents might be afraid um, of what could happen to their child should they come out as trans. They might fear for their opportunities in education, and these are real and valid fears, because really, even up till very recently, this year, there wasn't federal protection for a trans person in their employment. A person could just be fired because they're trans in this country, and we see a lot of inequalities and discrimination, oppression, and all the ways you might imagine. Healthcare, job opportunities, education, housing, um, and people who are trans are more likely to experience bullying, like the trans youth in school, bullying and violence because of transphobia. So I also wanted to make sure that I was very clear on that. It has nothing to do with really the child's gender or gender expression or identity. The problem is the transphobia, which is ignorance and hate and or fear of other people in society, and society's response to transphobia, saying that it's okay. In some states, still they have a criminal defense of trans panic, which is a defense when a person is violent towards a transgender individual or non-binary. They give this defense of trans panic, which to me, it's just inhumane and horrible. But that's the society we live in, and hopefully we're evolving away from that. So I'm not sure how far I got away from your question.
No, you're
But
fine. You're actually leading into the next question, but go ahead.
but I was yeah, sure. So it's the parent. Parents often, okay, would push their child away. The child's non-binary, transgender. They push that kid away, or demand gender conformity, right, to traditional gender norms. And giving that parent the benefit of the doubt, maybe it was because they're afraid of what might happen to that child out in the world, which, okay, is understandable, knowing that we live in a transphobic society, right? And a lot of times, trans youth were even pushed out of the home. And so we can just think of all the other outcomes for a child who's kicked out of the home, and what resources they might have and what might happen to that youth, because transgender youth are disproportionately homeless. And what happens to youth when they're homeless? They don't have an education, they don't have resources, they're young, and they're vulnerable. So that could lead, just like any homeless person, lead to negative mental health outcomes: depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, substance use, and just being a vulnerable person in society leads to violence against the person. And
So,
sure.
with all of this, this fear and these potential negative outcomes if a parent's child comes out as trans, as a parent, pertaining to these potentially negative circumstances, what are some additional ways that these families can provide support and care for their child?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So, education is wonderful. Those books are very helpful. If you're in the Louisville area and you're watching this anytime close to today, I facilitate a support group specifically for parents of trans youth, which seems to be very helpful. What's really great is, and there are other support groups online. There's plenty of other resources and supports, and not just online, but that can connect you in your own community. So wherever you are in whatever time you might run across this video or podcast. So, but it with all of the negative mental health outcomes, again, it's not because of the transgender identity, it's because of the negative response of transphobia towards that individual. And I have a very hopeful statistic for parents, is that while transgender youth are more at risk for negative mental health outcomes, studies are showing that that's due to transphobia. It's not due to being trans or the gender identity. And when a parent or caregiver, guardian in the home is supportive, affirming of their transgender child's gender, and loving towards their child in the home, their child has the same likelihood of any mental health outcome as the general population. So what I'm saying is, again, while transphobia is very damaging to a transgender person's mental health and all different facets of life, like we talked about, employment, education, housing, because of discrimination, not because of the identity, but for youth whose parent affirms them in their gender and supports them in their home, same likelihood of any mental health outcome. So
It
it's
really just
really,
it really just comes back to, like you said, that they just need to continuously reassure and reaffirm and let them know that it is not their fault, because you keep coming back to the transphobia in society, which is the
yeah, it's
main
their fault. Yeah, it's the
issue.
yeah, it's that transphobia, it's that mentality and the fear, the ignorance, and sometimes hate even, that is the problem and is the fault. And that is so big and great. It can be put onto the transgender person, but it's not their, that's not where the problem lies. The problem lies in the transphobia. And it's just so hopeful for parents, because the old trope, oh, my child is not conforming to the gender norms, so in order to force them to conform to gender norms, I'm going to, whatever it was, abuse them, hit them, yell at them, threaten to kick them out of the house, and then if they don't, kick them out of the house. Well, that doesn't change anybody's gender identity, and there's nothing wrong with a transgender identity either. The problem is the transphobia. And, looking back in history, we might think, oh, well, that parent might have just been doing possibly what they thought was correct because they were afraid of the negativity for their transgender child, and they didn't have the knowledge that you can't change a gender identity.
Right.
So, but now we have that knowledge. We have a lot of it. We have plenty of studies, and we have supports and resources. So I hope too to bring some of that to light today, and to just make it clear for the parents that if your child is consistently, insistently, and persistently out of the gender binary or trans, that you can affirm that child, and they're not going to be at risk for the depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, or anything like that, as long as they're that support at home from the carer provides resiliency that protects against transphobia. And that is so important, and that is so amazing for me to look at folks in the transgender community, how creative, resilient, that they really are and that they've learned to be, is they're survivors and they're very powerful.
So in regards to support, so we have talked about support from family members and or parents.
Mm-hmm.
In regards to transphobia, which stems from the community, it's so important to also begin to receive support from the community. So since typically overall, unfortunately, whatever community that trans person may be living in would probably be more negative than not, it's more important for them to find, one, their own community, right? But then also, what do you suggest in regards to helping to improve the community as a whole? Like, what are some things that family members or trans youth or allies can do to further improve community as a whole in regards to transphobia?
Yeah, becoming aware of it, and to demonstrate your own safety. Here's something super duper. I'll start with some little things, and we can build up to big things. To demonstrate your own safety. So, like in my email signature, I include my pronouns, and I do that to increase visibility to trans and the LGBTQ community, and also to demonstrate my safety to the community. And that's just something little. And that's something that I do when I introduce myself, and my pronouns are she, her. Of course, education. And then to support your organizations that are helping trans people. So the Louisville Youth Group is an organization in Louisville, obviously, that is a safe place and very resourceful. They have mentors, all kinds of events and programming for youth, and it'd be great, volunteer there, support with a donation, share the information, learn more about it, become aware of the issues surrounding trans people, and volunteer, support, use your voice, donate, and vote appropriately. We're frozen. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. I think.
Okay, sorry. I froze for a bit.
Oh, so I can see you. I can hear you. I think it's Emily might be frozen.
Okay.
You know what? And while she is, let me ask you a question real quick, and you can answer this until we get that figured out, which is, we have a question from the audience about a grandson who likes to wear hot pink nail polish. The grandparents are fine with it, but they worry about bullies at school.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I would like to, if it were my grandson or my son, practice how you might respond to bullies. Bullies want to get a rise out of someone, right? They want to embarrass and belittle. The bully's motivated to raise their own self-esteem by lowering someone else's self-esteem. So I would affirm, that child's choice to wear that hot pink nail polish and to be himself and express himself however he feels he wants to. And also, just to prepare, if somebody, and then to explain what a bully does, just like that. There are some people out there that are bullies, and we don't know why they're bullies. And what they do is they bully by making mean, nasty comments. And if somebody does that about your nail polish, let's practice how you might respond, and then just to have a couple practice sessions and have some remarks ready to go, like, oh yeah, I got it at Target, and just keep it moving, and try not to engage with the bullies, and just be prepared. And also to go to your adults. So I don't know how old the child is, but hopefully there would be an understanding, safe adult, whatever the situation is. If this person happens to be physically back in school, and the child is non-binary or gender creative, to identify a supportive adult in that school or wherever the child might be, to identify a safe adult to go to for help, because I don't think kids should have to deal with bullies on their own.
So sorry, I got booted, but you're answering a question?
Yes, somebody,
Okay.
had a question about, my child who's outside of is expressing themselves outside the gender norm, how to deal with bullies.
Perfect. That kind of leads me into my next question, actually.
Okay.
So, when a situation like that occurs where your child is getting bullied, what are some ways that child can begin to communicate their feelings? Because I know that a lot of kids, just in general, typically tend to suppress their emotions, sometimes when it gets to be too much, or they're too scared to talk about the bullying or whatever. What do you suggest trans youth in particular can do to feel more secure and safe in communicating their feelings?
I think connection to other trans youth is super important. I also have a group for trans youth. It is a specific support group. I know that LYG has support groups, and then GLSEN, HRC, which is the Human Rights Campaign, and the Trevor Project. They all provide a lot more resources. So no matter where you are, there are resources in your community. As I think like a gay straight alliance at school is so valuable, because that should be a bully-free area, an area to be connected with other people that understand, and where folks can be comfortable and feel safe being themselves and expressing those emotions. So getting resources in the community and getting connected with others. And sometimes we adults are not so great at discussing our emotions, and that's okay. Our society also doesn't like us to be weak at any point. Not man, not woman, not non-binary, not trans. So, not to be weak and not to be emotional. I know that I've had the word emotional be used against me, and we're human. We have emotions, and if you're having a challenge with your own emotions as a parent, um, your child might learn that from you or see that from you, and it is awesome to receive therapy. Therapy either in a group setting, with someone in your family, or individually. There's a lot of help in Louisville and in Kentucky right now. Right now specifically, I know where I go to school at Campbellsville University, and due to the pandemic, all counseling sessions are free through the end of the year. So if you're watching this now, and it's not just me that's providing it, I have a lot of other colleagues, and they have open appointments, even during the day, weekends, and on Saturdays. So there's help available. And I think it's really important too, and I think I miss saying this, like with the support group for parents of trans kids. What's awesome is that this space is giving the parents a place to talk about their own feelings with a really healthy boundary, because the children don't come into the parent group. So that way the child's not taking on, because it's, again, for the parents, it's normal, and it is okay to be confused if your child is non-binary or transgender, and that's perfectly all right. And we welcome you to the group so that we can help you and you can help us learn from each other, and support each other in figuring out our own emotions, away from the kids. Because again, that's just a healthy boundary. If I'm a parent and I've got my own emotions that I need to work through, I can't really work through that with a child. So again, like parents, it is awesome self-care and very empowering to seek out your own therapeutic services. And especially right now, there are very accessible options for people in our community in Kentucky.
That's great. I think just continuing to talk about all the different resources that are available and letting parents know that it's okay to separate the two and about boundaries and all that, it's so important.
Yeah.
Another thing we had mentioned like previously that some children, some trans youth, some children in general tend to internalize their feelings, which leads me to my next question, which is, what is internalized transphobia? And can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So our society, at least in Kentucky, there are some other states. I think California, when they have a third gender marker now. But like I said, yeah,
That's awesome.
isn't it great? So when we're born and on our birth certificates, we get choice A or choice B, male or female. Male always coming first, right? So, um, that's just an example of trans invisibility, right? Transphobia is when a trans person it goes to the bathroom and people are staring at this person and being just rude and hateful towards that person, or a person when they decide to transition, or when a person is found out to be transgender, that they're blamed or they're fired or they can't get housing like a cisgender person would. That's all this transphobia, and it's the messages that we received growing up, and that can be internalized. So it what it is to be internalized, a person can start to think, can internalize that shame, be shameful that they're transgender or non-binary, and that's, again, that's not that transgender person's responsibility or shame. That should lie in the folks that perpetuated transphobia or a genderist society, or maybe they were teased, growing up. Maybe they were bullied and they didn't have that supportive adult or an outlet to express their emotions or any connections. They might start feeling that, no, I'm really not worthy, just like internalized racism or internalized sexism, thinking that the person is not good enough, not as good as the dominant identity or the dominant group, because those ideas are so strong, they sometimes can get within us. But it's great to talk about it, because awareness, we can start to kind of work that transphobia out, or even homophobia that's internalized, just to become a little bit more comfortable, little bit by little, of who we are, and to realize where the problem really lies, not inside. The problem didn't come from inside the transgender person. It came from that transphobic society.
Yeah, exactly. It's just such a sad situation that our society, for some reason, can't grasp the concept of gender not being one thing or the other, like only giving a human being two options. It's just,
and here we are talking about it, though. So I don't want to be nihilistic, like this is exactly how society is. Like I said, a couple other states now are changing the way in order to change your gender marker. It's, Kentucky, where we are, it is more challenging. Our history, speaks for itself. And yet here we are. I don't know if everybody that's on this chat, is in Kentucky, but probably so, because this is Mental Health Louisville Zoom. But here we are, right? And society is changing. And with talks like this, so I don't want to give an unhopeful message. I want to give a very hopeful message to people, that there is support and that things are changing. And as we're talking about this, we can rightly put the blame of the problem that trans people face on a transphobic mindset ideas in society.
Yeah. And making it known that if you have transphobic ideals or beliefs, that it is possible to unlearn those beliefs. You just have to seek out the resources, and it's not something that, is in your DNA. It's just like racism. It's something that you can unlearn. So if someone is watching this and then they start to, after seeing our conversation, start to think back on certain situations and feel guilty, it's like, it's okay because you can unlearn these things. So kind of nearing the end here, what's one thing or one topic in regards to trans youth that you would like the audience to know and learn and get from this conversation?
I think the biggest takeaway, since we're talking about supporting trans youth, and I think we've done a good job of hitting on it, and there's nothing wrong with being trans, and being trans is healthy. And while we're talking about, trans are more visible now, but trans people have always existed, and there's evidence for that, and like since the beginning of time, right? And that it's normal and that it's healthy to be trans, and that any problems that a transgender person faces in regards to the gender identity, it's because of the response from society, or the systemic transphobia, and that it's healthy and that it's wonderful to be trans, and that there are successful and happy transgender adults in society too. So that'd be another great thing, is to look for those role models, transgender adults who are role models, to give motivation and inspiration both for the parents and for the youth. And for a big takeaway, it's that yes, to be transgender is to be in a marginalized population, and the transgender youth who has supportive carers at home who are supportive in that child's gender identity, and affirming in the child's gender, the child's just in the same boat as all the other kids, as far as experiencing any negative mental health outcomes like depressive symptoms, anxiety, suicide, or substance abuse. And I find that very hopeful and just so powerful and affirming and empowering for the parents, the whole family as a unit, and for the child.
Yeah, I agree. I think so too. I think the more we talk about trans youth and transgender identities as a whole, and transphobia as well, just bringing awareness to the whole situation is just going to make everything better. And that's hopeful in itself. It's just knowing that people are out there talking and discussing and supporting and loving and, being there for the trans community. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I see one little, do you see this question here? Oh,
I was going to say, I was going to pop on and ask if anybody has any questions. Now's a good time to ask them. Another question is, what about people who, look at maybe parents as making their child trans, like encouraging it in a way that maybe is counter to what the child wants? Or I know we've seen some of that in culture. That I think it was a few years back. There was a J. Crew ad with somebody painting their son's toenails, and it got this huge backlash. So I'm kind of curious as far as, the idea of maybe people saying, well, are you making your child that way because it's trendy or cool now? Or, you know what I mean?
Sure. I think, I don't know that, because what I heard in your question too is as opposed to what that child wants. So I really don't know of any instances when a parent was trying to make their child trans when their child was cisgender. I really have never heard of that. And I don't know about this J. Crew ad. I think that people get it in their mind that they've never seen trans people, and now that they are, because just so many changes in the world, right? Look at us. We're able to have this conversation. We're all in 3 different places and it's 2020. We have social media and the internet, and that gives marginalized people a way to communicate. And that's just one example. And that, we're evolving as society. So, transgender youth and people are more visible now, and for someone that's not ever recognized that they might have it in their mind but without any real world or scientific validity. This what do you say when people blame the parents for making their child trans because it's cool or trendy? The idea that it's cool or trendy might just because folks know more about what it is to be trans, or that the LGBT community has more of a voice, but it's just not valid. It's just not what we're seeing in social science literature. People are not doing that. You cannot make anyone transgender. You cannot make anyone cisgender. You cannot make anyone lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, questioning, intersex. People just are who they are.
So what I really hear you saying is, put that back on the person who's saying that. Put that back on the person who believes that this parent is doing this thing, and maybe look at their own biases and their own beliefs about that.
Absolutely, yeah. And it just makes you wonder, like, what is the relationship between this person saying, oh, you're just doing it because it's cool or trendy? It doesn't sound like it's coming from, an actual parent of a child or someone in that child's family system. So sometimes it's good to mind your own business. Sometimes it's good to, educate yourself in your own armchair at home.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so we have another question here, which is, what are some of the off-limit questions that you would recommend maybe you shouldn't ask an individual who identifies as trans?
Well, it would be the same like with anybody else, you wouldn't, especially, it's always about the context, so questions are okay, but no questions are going to be the same as anything else. You might be curious because you don't know what someone's assigned gender is at birth, but it's none of your business. So, if you can kind of think, this is none of my business, or would I ask my cisgender neighbor this question? And the answer is no, then probably not. It's not our business what medical treatment anyone is receiving, wants to receive, has received, right? It's just a no-no. So yeah, if you just think about, well, would I ask a cisgender person this? No, then no. If this is your close friend and you are willing to make a big apology if you do something wrong, then that's okay too. Like, it is okay to apologize and to make a mistake. And I think intention, what your intentions are should help guide you in whether or not you should ask a question.
Another question is, how can extended family members support a transgender child in their family?
Using that child's pronouns. So if the child is a trans boy, using he, him, his, or if the child's non-binary and they choose to use they, use that. If the child's changed their name, use that name. And that is so affirming. And that's the affirmation that we're talking about in the home that protects youth against the anxiety and depression that transphobia causes.
Okay, and then we have one comment here. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. It's called, someone says, the book As Nature Made Him by John Colapinto is a story of a cis male raised as a girl after a botched circumcision that backfired dramatically. And that supports that, like, you can't force gender identity on someone.
No,
so I guess that kind of answers that first question, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Charlotte. As Nature Made Him. Oh,
I'm sorry. I
It's okay.
marked it as done.
Sure. I haven't used the Q&A on Zoom, but yeah, and Charlotte brings up a great, great point too, is that in the medical community, physicians did not historically always do the right thing with intersex or transgender people. They tried to force people into the gender binary, which was traumatizing, traumatic for people. Mm-hmm.
And then someone else asks, can you go over what cisgender means and the different categories or the different, I think they're referring to like the different gender types or how we identify.
Okay, so, and this is always changing. So, and I do my best to be current. A student, a lifelong learner, and so I'll do my best. And so a lot of times you'll see transgender with a star, and that denotes that identities are always changing and evolving and emerging now that more visibility is coming forward. So just because I haven't heard of a type of identity doesn't mean that it's not valid. It totally is. So cisgender, I happen to be cisgender. When I was born, the OB said it's a girl, and I now identify as female. I'm cisgender. Cis means same, CIS. And then transgender is trans is change. So if I identified as a male, I would, as if I were assigned female at birth, but now identify as a male, I would be a trans male. Some people are trans masculine or trans feminine, and that just means that their gender identity doesn't match with the assigned gender at birth, and that they choose to say that they're more masculine, and that's completely valid as well. Some people are gender fluid, some people are non-binary, gender creative, gender expansive, gender queer, demi-boy, demi-girl, intersex. All of these are valid and just different ways to express themselves and express their gender.
Is there a good resource for people who maybe want to, read more about that, or, like a family member who's trying to support, but all these terms maybe they start to feel confusing for them? Is there a good resource for where people might be able to go for references?
Yes, I think GLSEN is really good, which is GLSEN. And then the HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, are also very good.
Okay, we'll put those on our website as well under our Mental Wellness Summit resources.
Oh, okay.
So people find
Sure.
them. Yeah, because we want to make sure everybody's able to get those. So I think that's it for our questions. I want to thank you both for this conversation. I think it's, like I said in the beginning, I feel like it's such an important conversation. I know even though, I'm in the field and I do this at the same time, I feel like I'm still learning. And so I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience, Sam. And Emily, I really appreciate you coming on and being a fabulous host. I know you're a fabulous mental health advocate, and so this is very, very helpful, and we really appreciate it. Before we close out here, can you tell people where they can find you, and if you have any, anything on the horizon that you want people to know about?
Sure. So you can find me in two places. I have a website. It's sites.google.com/family counseling, or you can just, probably easier is to search for my name on Psychology Today, Sam Fox Gabinio. And I know that this information for this talk will be on Mental Health Louisville website, right, for a while. And I have a support group that I facilitate for parents of trans youth, which is so wonderful and it's been very beneficial. And I'll have one starting soon for trans youth, so up to age 25. So yeah, please come and join us if you think that this could be helpful for you.
Awesome. And Emily?
You can find me at the Wondering Mind podcast on Instagram, and I also have a Twitter account. It's TWM podcast _. And then, yeah, you can just check out the podcast. We discuss all different types of mental health topics. I bring on guests typically every episode, and we just have conversations like we just had today, where we just normalize and destigmatize and bring awareness. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. And if you missed any part of this or you want to catch it and watch it again, we will be putting them up on our YouTube channel probably by this weekend, which you can also access through our webpage. And then we'll also have an audio version on the Sonomind app, and we'll have that information on our webpage too. So we're just trying to help everybody get this information again and again. And please feel free to reach out to Emily or to Sam if you have any questions or just want to follow up with what they're doing. So thank you very much, everyone. We really appreciate you joining our talk.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
All right,
you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.